Oh, the world's a stage, at least according to Star Trek Prodigy Season 1, Episode 13. And now that I've seen it, well, it's time to talk about it. Careful ahead, as there will be spoilers, and boy, are they fun this time. You've been warned, now on with the show, and this time I mean that very, very literally. This episode picks up on that lingering thread from the last episode where our crew sped off towards a distress call. The plot of this episode, while fun and fairly interesting, is not all that complex, yet I do peg this as one of my favorite episodes of the series thus far. If you happen to be watching this video without having watched the episode, this is one of those special occasions where I absolutely would urge you to do so. Most of the absolute blast I had with this episode came from the characters, performances, and all of that from our guest cast. You see, the entire population of the pre-warp planet who sent this distress call had modeled themselves on Starfleet, but in particular, some of the crew from the TOS era USS Enterprise as captained by Kirk himself. This was a very reminiscent idea of a boatload of older Star Trek and even just sci-fi stories. Some very clear references to the episodes of TOS where an artifact or an individual was left behind on a planet, which then informed the development of that culture. It was also fairly like the opening scene of Into Darkness, I believe it was. And also it reminded me of that Voyager episode, I believe it was called Muse, where B'Elanna was trapped on a planet and a local man was keeping her as some sort of prisoner in order to use her and the logs on the shuttle, or perhaps it was the Delta Flyer, I can't recall which, to write plays for the patron of their city. It was a pretty cool episode. I know a lot of people did not care for that one. However, I watched that one a lot and I kind of enjoyed it for what it was. Long story short, the people in this story had an unauthorized encounter with the old Enterprise gang, most likely at a point following the cancellation of the original series. More on that in a bit. During this encounter of a no-named redshirt, although we did get his name at the end of the episode, he was lost on the planet and happened to live out the rest of his days, helping them try to survive a curse that had been infecting the area. We find out at the end by listening to the logs he left on the shuttle that he was actually being helped by them as well, so it was kind of this mutual thing, and he grew to appreciate them outside of the bounds of his Starfleet duties. While this may not sound like the most to go on for an episode, the real enjoyment came from the characters. The entire civilization was modeled around the TOS Enterprise. We had people who were basically doing bizarro impersonations of Kirk, Sulu, Spock, McCoy. The names and words were bastardized versions. For instance, they called themselves the Enterpriseians. You know, they had a few of the names a little incorrect, some of the phrases a little incorrect. They called it pulse power. You know, just a lot of, I guess, that telephone game thing where people are hearing something and passing it along, but it's not quite right. It's a little different. It reminds me a bit of the original series of Star Trek where they had the Yangs and the comms or whatever, and then Kirk broke out the Constitution and saved the day. You know, that sort of thing where it's a reference we're familiar with that has been changed by its own evolution throughout the years. I guess it's about 100 years since the Enterprise left. I'm not entirely sure where in the timeline this is supposed to take place because there are some time travel shenanigans going on in this show. One of the jokes, if you want to call it that, was the sheer reverence they showed for this no-name redshirt who came to their world to help him. It was basically idolizing an away mission redshirt destined to die thing. So redshirts are typically the joke of Star Trek. They're sent down to die. They don't need a name. But this community of people was revering him, the red-shirted ensign, Son, they bastardized his name as well, as basically their hero, their worshipper, their emissary from the Federation who gave them the ability to become the people that they are today. They had his red color uniform on display, and if you noticed, none of them wore a red version of the uniform. They all assembled a Spock-type blue tunic, but none of them were wearing red because that is the revered color to them. Very interesting, and I liked that sort of twist on the old tradition of the red shirts. The reason I said it reminded me of the Voyager episode Muse, I believe, is because they enacted various plays and skits centered around the exploits of the Enterprise based upon the logs they had heard down through the years, as well as first-hand accounts from that ensign. Everything about that part of the story was just superb, in my opinion. The real point of the story was to get Dal and team to interact with these people and kind of come to terms with the fact that while they aren't officially Starfleet, they're not officially Federation in the same manner as these folks are not, they're all still capable of living up to those ideals and becoming worthy regardless if they choose to point their lives in that service in that direction. It turns out that the curse impacting these people has spread to Dal, and the rest of his team must rush to find a cure. Meanwhile, Murph was on the ship, not in good condition. It turns out at the end of the episode that Murph is turning into some sort of cocoon being. Not really sure where that's going. That wasn't really a plot point in the episode, I just wanted to mention it because I'm going to forget it in a moment. Once our team adventures into the Forbidden Area, they discover that all of the curse is really just a sickness that comes from radiation poisoning or something along those lines. Herein lies the reasoning that I believe this encounter happened after Season 3 of TOS. The reason everyone is getting sick is due to contamination of leaking plasma from the warp core of the shuttle Galileo. It's been continually leaking into a cave system rich with dilithium, which I guess has some sort of amplified effect. Jankum had a wonderful moment to shine with his engineering abilities as he is able to get the shuttle and shut off some of the systems. These systems were the ones causing some sort of interference in the area. Even after he does so, the Protostar is still unable to beam them back up due to this interference, so they must move in closer. But in order to do so, this would knock the Janeway hologram offline. They devise a plan to bring up several of the Enterprisians to pilot the ship, as they had basically learned how to operate the old TOS-style controls in all of their rituals and such. It's a pretty cool scene, and we see them kind of freak out over the fancy newfangled controls before Janeway has the ship reconfigure the layout of the bridge to match a TOS-era Constitution class, and the bridge somewhat half-transforms into the Enterprise bridge, intermingled with more of the sleek Protostar control, and that was just a fantastic image, probably something they could only get away with in a animated show in a plausible way at least, but it looked fantastic to me, and that's one of the things this show has done right. That's the second time we've had a recreation of an older ship. We had the Enterprise D with a lot of legacy characters, and I like these callbacks quite a bit. For a children's show, they're really digging deep into the Star Trek lore. They managed to pilot the ship into range in order to beam our team up just in the nick of time as the Galileo plummets into the depths of the cave and blows up. Here comes a very, very nitpicky down for me, but how freaking amazing would it have been for them to beam up the whole damn shuttle and kind of have that be the little project for Jankum. He could restore it and then our kids could go off using the old Galileo on some sort of side missions. I know that's probably not practical, and it may not have been a very feasible thing within the storyline, but it's little touches like that that I feel could add such neat little bonuses to shows. If they were to, bring in that Galileo, have them fly that around, at least have it in the shuttle bay. They may not even use it that frequently, just have it there to look at as they walk past. That just makes my heart feel great. I know it's probably a very little nitpicky fan servicey thing that doesn't serve the plot. That's just one of the things that to me would make the universe feel a bit more connected, although this show is doing a great job connecting back, especially to TOS and Voyager. There is also a very small interaction between real Janeway and the Diviner, who is freshly awakened from his biobed. He seems to be having some kind of trouble getting his mind to come back to him clearly. I'm not entirely sure if this is a response due to the fact that he's outside of time, or if it's just a physical injury, or if he's kind of mentally unstable and gone mad a little bit. Who's to say exactly, but he does manage to get out enough to convince Janeway that the people on the Protostar are the real enemies who need to be stopped. And he's also able to get out just enough to let Janeway know he is aware of who Chakotay is, and that what he knows of him is that he was a prisoner. And that's about all we get out of him before the episode ends. So very interested to see what happens with the Janeway Diviner situation. Obviously, she's going to believe he is on her side, at least for the short term. And I do wonder what our team is going to do when eventually everyone crosses paths. There is also a small reference of the Denobulan who escaped the explosion earlier on in the beginning of this, I almost said the beginning of the season, but it was actually the start from the mid-season break. Not really sure if they're going anywhere with that. I found it a bit odd that he was rescued by someone else and he was no longer present in the escape pod. Just a small point right there. And we also learned a little bit more in this episode about what's going on with that whole trap that was left on the Protostar, that virus, whatever. Jankum tried everything he could think of to deactivate it, to do anything with it, and it just adapts and is unable to be stopped. What's interesting, though, is it doesn't seem to be harmful to our crew. So I'm wondering what's going on with that. Does it have some semblance of sentience in itself, or does it just not attack physical beings, and that's why it's not retaliating? Kind of interested to see where that goes, and I'm wondering if it's actually going to be a character or related to a character who appeared in the first part of the series, but kind of died and hasn't been back. I'm forgetting his name right now. He's the big robot guy, Dreadnought, something like that. Could that be him upgraded into a new program or something that was related to his technology? I don't know, but I feel like he's not gone, especially since his name is still appearing in the credits. Overall, I am still very much enjoying this show. This might be one of my favorite episodes. I don't know if it's my favorite because it's been such a long time since I watched the first half of this series. But for now, I think this may be my favorite episode since they've come back from break. The very nice and clever use of these characters imitating and sort of modeling themselves after the TOS characters, well, it could be considered a little too much, because obviously they were doing the Shatner impression, a little bit of the Spock and Sulu impression, but that just makes sense to me, and it seemed to be sort of a meta-commentary as well at the same time. So I really enjoyed the episode. This is one of the ones that just talking about the story really doesn't do it justice, because it's the content contained within the interactions and the characters that really make this a special episode. Otherwise, it's just kind of a bare-bones story that isn't all that fascinating on the surface. But what are you thinking about Prodigy? Are you still enjoying it? Are you not watching it? Leave all your thoughts and comments below. While you're down there, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, share it with any friends or family you might have. I don't know. I always feel terrible when people tell me to share videos because I'm like, there's nobody here. Anyways, I'll see you next time, and until then, computer, end program.